5:03 according to my clock. We're going to go ahead and call the meeting to order at this time of the Historic Preservation Board. If everybody can please rise. Don't worry, Arthur, you don't have to. But if everybody please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. All right. Jamie, do you mind calling the roll so we can establish quorum?
Here.
Present.
He is in the back, yes, thank you.
Here.
I am present. Thank you so much. Quorum having been established, we'll go ahead and conduct the business of the board this evening. The first item will be the approval of the April 4th, 2022 Historic Preservation Board minutes. I hope everybody's had a chance to review those. If there are any modifications or changes needed to be made, please bring those to our attention at this time. Otherwise, I would entertain a motion to adopt.
I move to adopt the minutes as they stand.
Thank you so much. Seconded by Mr. Marcus. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, those will be adopted. Thank you so much, and those are signed and there. The next item is the public swearing in. Having no members of the public present, we can dispense with that until somebody does appear. That'll bring us to the first agenda item here this evening. Historic landmark designation under case number UDP HPD 22003, historic landmark designation of the Castro Convertibles at 2860 North Federal Highway. And that technically the applicant is the city of Fort Lauderdale, that being brought to their attention by our board. Before we go and address this item, I just want to confirm, was the owner of the property noticed for tonight's hearing?
Yes.
Okay.
The certified mail notice that went to the property owner, and we have confirmation of receipt on March 31st.
Okay, well, then notice. Yeah, good. It's been a while.
Is it on?
I think so.
Following up on that, my question was, did you hear anything back from them?
We did not. We also did a newspaper notice
Okay.
in the Sun Sentinel.
Okay, so with that, let's go ahead and do, we don't really need to do disclosures on this, so.
Yes, just for the record.
All right, let's go ahead and do disclosures on this. We'll start down in the cheap seats. None. Ms. Lyons?
Drive by.
Okay, Mr. Parker? Drive by? Okay. Mr. Marcus?
Actually, yes, this grew out of the initial 10 projects that I submitted, and this is the one that's up for historic designation. So, yes, I've studied the project very well.
Okay, thank you. Disclosure, Mr. Carney?
Nothing to disclose.
I don't know if the only thing I have to disclose is I called Tricia to discuss the notification to the owner, and I hope we can discuss that before we get too far into it.
Okay, let's definitely bring that up. I just want to disclose that I drive by it almost every day on my way either to work or on the way back home. I've actually never visited the storefront, but I'm well familiar with it. So I want to talk about that, Tim, in a minute, but let's go ahead and get the staff report first, and then we can address the notification issue. Go ahead.
Okay, before I get started on the staff report, I just want to make one correction that was emailed out last week with the listing of the applicant and the owner in the staff report, just clarifying that. So that was distributed via email with the updated version.
Trish, can you do me a favor and eat that mic a little bit more for me, or maybe it's not on, I don't know, but.
Yeah, I can't hear.
Feels like it's broken. Is that better?
Yeah, a little bit, thank you.
Okay. It doesn't seem like it's working as well tonight, but just to make that clarification that the applicant is listed correctly now as the city of Fort Lauderdale and the property owner is June 36 Properties LLC. So this is a designation application.
One moment before you move on, because then I just want to address the notification aspect.
Sure.
Tim, we'll get into your question in a little bit, but I just want to confirm the owner of the property having been updated on the staff report is the currently listed owner, the entity that was noticed
Yes.
for today's hearing.
Yes,
And that was the owner that returned, or that we received return receipt from?
that's correct.
Okay, got it.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, This is a designation application that was initiated through a motion by the Historic Preservation Board for the designation of the Castro Convertibles building at 2860 North Federal Highway. It was constructed in 1958 and is located on North Federal Highway in an area that abuts a residential district. It was developed at a time when cars were becoming more popular and residential subdivisions were being expanded from the city center. And so this building is very indicative of that motor court response to those further developments into suburbia. So there's several elements that this building is significant for. We'll go over the exact criteria at the end of this presentation, but just to give a broad overview of some of the significance, the people that were involved with this property are the Castros, who actually own Castro Convertibles. Bernard Castro, he came from Italy and immigrated to New York City. He started working for an upholsterer there shortly after he arrived. Well, he arrived when he was 15, so once he became of age to start working, that was his first job, and he was upholstering Davenports. And that's when he got the idea to create Castro Convertibles, to create a sofa that was not as bulky as a Davenport, but could still be functional in a living room and provide that sofa bed. So he started developing his product alongside his wife, Teresa, and then he was very innovative in the way that he distributed his marketing message of his new product. So he used his daughter on television to show how easy it is to unfold the Castro Convertible sofa into a sofa bed with just one hand. And that daughter, her name is Bernadette, and Bernadette became known as the most televised girl in America. So she was widely known throughout the United States. The product was quickly expanded into multiple regions. There were several stores in Florida. The one on North Federal Highway opened in 1958. Going into the building a little bit, the Castro Convertibles building was designed by architect Charles McCarahan. And Charles McCarahan is a very well-known local architect who is significant for his contributions to Fort Lauderdale and beyond when it comes to mid-century modern architecture. So that's very evident within the design of this building, which holds a lot of architectural integrity to this day. A few things have been slightly modified over time, including some of the angled glass features that were on the front of the building that were replaced in 2007. Interior changes occurred, and shortly after the construction, an addition was built onto this building, but it didn't affect the main volume of the structure, and a lot of the shapes and the most significant portion, the pylon sign that is visible from North Federal Highway and extends from the floor all the way up into its very magnificent shape. So the architecture of it continues to be a main focal point of this designation. And just something fun as part of the interior, when it was Castro Convertibles, they did have a yacht inside, and they outfitted it in Castro Convertibles furniture. They also decorated several rooms with different themes, including Bernard's own office, and they had a Polynesian room and things like that. So they got really creative.
You know, when I saw some of the photos and some of the comments in the report, I didn't realize that you literally meant there was a boat inside. Like
Yes.
that, yeah.
Yes.
Amazing.
And, just going back 1 second, Charles McCarran actually designed Bernard and Teresa Castro's home as well, which still exists, but it's modified. So it's a little bit different than what the original design was.
Interesting.
And so just going into the criteria for designation, the designation report identified 3 different criteria for which this building is eligible for designation. The first is C. It's identification with a person or persons who significantly contributed to the development of the city, state, or nation. And like I mentioned before, it's significant for its association with both the owners, Bernard and Teresa Castro, and their contributions to the furniture world and to the local municipality, and then its association with the architect, Charles McCarahan. It's eligible under D. It's identification as the work of a master builder, designer, or architect whose individual work has influenced the development of the city, state, or nation. And again, it's significant for its architect, Charles McCarahan. He had a very large local impact on how the mid-century modern architecture was designed for the tropical environment. And that can be seen throughout the city today and is widely talked about. And then it's also significant under F. It's distinguishing characteristics of an architectural style valuable for the study of a period, method of construction, or use of indigenous materials. And this building continues to uphold its architectural integrity. All of the original design intent is evident still today, and it's a unique piece of mid-century modern architecture along Federal Highway. And so it concludes my staff report.
Thank you. Thank you, Trish, for that and for all of that background. Just a couple of questions before we get into kind of the discussion. And I'm going to work, I guess, well, as it relates to the subsections, for the subsections of the criterion for consideration, am I correct? There only needs to be a finding of one. It would be any one in order to qualify for designation, or was it two?
It only needs to meet one.
One, okay. But it's your opinion that it in fact meets three separate criteria?
That's correct.
Okay. And then as to the general structural changes of the property, the only thing I heard was the angled windows or the angled glass in the front that was changed in 2007. Otherwise, it's essentially the same
Yes.
or similar.
Yeah, there also was an addition in 1958, or 1959, which was just 1 year after the construction of the building, but it didn't modify the front volume of the structure, and you can still see the main portion of the building.
Got it. Okay. Thank you for that. Let's go ahead and open public comment. No members of the public being present. We'll go ahead and close public comment. I'm going to bring it to the board for questions and comments or general conversation. And I'm going to start with Mr. Chavone.
Okay, I want to choose my words extremely careful. My concern is not for ownership consent, it's for confirmation. And I'm certainly not saying that our city staff did not do their job. I have a business. The mail has not been working for me for the last year. And even if it was, for something of this magnitude, we have a $7 million building. We're talking about a designation. It's going to make a tremendous impact on the owner, and it's all for the right reasons. The criteria has obviously been met one or two, three times according to our staff. That, for me, is not on the table. What's on the table is I just am not comfortable not hearing from ownership. I think it's so important, and we've had this conversation ongoing. We did something new and different, and we're very successful with Times Square. We notified the owners. They came here. We had a discussion. We came to a conclusion. And I'm not saying or suggesting that that's what I'm looking for with this property. I just think it's important that the city of Fort Lauderdale, being represented by this board, take every consideration that the owner cannot come back and say, I didn't know, someone else signed that certified mail, someone did this or that. I would just be so much more comfortable if there was a person standing here saying, yes, we know, and no, we don't want to do it for whatever reason. We have that discussion, and then we make our vote. End of story. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tim. Anybody else? Bring it up to everyone.
I would completely echo those points. couldn't even add another line to it that I think would help make that point, as it sits somewhat out of the realm of our charge to make that. But I think the comfort level would be much more in place for me as well if there was some indication of ownership being present in the meeting.
Yeah, Mr. Carney.
What's seeing that certified mail for the same thing that Mr. Chabon just said? What if someone else signed the letter? Short of that working, what's our next option to ensure that the actual owner has been given proper notice? And for the sake of argument, what after we do that? Let's just say we serve the guy with a process server. He refuses to come here. What?
Yeah, then what?
What
right?
would our next option be?
And that's kind of my concern, right? Is we have, how many steps and what type of steps are we supposed to take other than what is, number one, allowable under the statute, required under the statute, or would be in the normal course of business? Certified mail, if you start making the argument of, well, who knows who signed it? I mean, we send to the address that the business has listed. They have listed and chosen to list an address to receive service of this type of notice. That's on them. If it had not come back signed as certified, but we put it in the newspaper and we sent this by regular mail and all of that, I would 100% be on board, Tim, with your point, and Richard with your assertion there too. But how many hoops are we supposed to jump through? I mean, what if they just don't want to come? What if they don't care? Are we supposed to require some sort of negative response from them saying, we don't want to be heard? Maybe that's preferable. I don't know that that's required, and I'm not sure that we need to jump through those hoops to do that. I'm comfortable saying that we have satisfied the notice requirements under the law. I would certainly echo the sentiment that I would be much more comfortable and much more happy if there was a representative here, and I wish that there were. But I don't know that that's on us. I think that we did our job to tell them that we are going to be discussing this and addressing this. We put them on notice that it's being considered, and we invited them here. In my opinion, they have chosen not to be here. Now, if they had sent Trish an email saying, look, we can't make it Monday, is there a way to get it changed or something like that? Yeah, happy to work with them. But we don't have that. What we have is they were noticed, they were advised, they were told, they're not here. It's not my job to babysit the owner, right? It's not this board's job to handhold the owner and say, are you going to show up on Monday? It's our job to say, we're discussing this if you'd like to be part of that conversation. And in my opinion, they have chosen not to be.
Can I respond to that?
Absolutely, please. Yeah.
To the letter of the law, you are correct, sir. However, I just feel like if we decided to wait another month and put it on next month's, I would be way better taking that path, the way you just described it. I would be able to digest that with the consideration that someone from the city or this board or whatever, we would take one more step to confirm that they actually have notice and they have chosen not to be here.
But we do have that confirmation, right, that they got notice because we have the return receipt from the mail. Now, whether or not they chose to be here,
that could have been a secretary signing it. That could have been anybody.
Doesn't matter.
I get stuff like that at the Parrot all the time. Anybody can sign that stuff and say, I got it.
Sure. And that's, but as the business owner, it's incumbent on you and it's your obligation to ensure the mail, especially certified mail that comes to that address is done, right?
I get it. That's the way it's explained. But my goodness, this is a $7 million property.
Well,
You
then
pay
you would-
$100,000 a year in property taxes. There's a lot of tentacles on this thing.
You would think that they would want to be here.
And I would think that maybe if they knew, they would. I just have a big question mark about it. I don't want to tear it up and split hairs. I'm so uncomfortable thinking that this property owner, if they aren't here and they know about it, then shame on them. Okay, then
We have no reason to believe that there's anything other than that, though, right?
We don't have any reason to believe one way or the other except for a receipt from the mail.
And that is the reason to believe that they will receive notice. And that's what it is, right? That signed receipt says we as a company have received.
Did our job.
We did our job, you know?
Get that
Now,
part.
and Tim, let me say, look, I hear your point. I hear your position. I agree with you. But, it is not our job, and it should not be the job of the city or of any board or, quite frankly, of any entity to ensure that somebody else does what's in their best interest. It's our job to make sure that they're aware of it, that we notify them of it, that we give them the opportunity to be heard, and barring some information to the contrary, how many times do we give,
Look, could I
bite
ask
at
the
the
city
apple?
attorney a question, please?
Yeah, please.
All right. Okay.
And that's, by the way,
Here's
that's
the
just
si-
my position, Tim. I'm sorry. That's just my position. I want to be real clear. I'm not saying, and I'm not trying to speak for any other member of the board here. When I'm saying this, that's my interpretation of what's going on here
Okay.
personally.
So here's a scenario. Board votes on a property like this and we say, okay, let's move forward. The application gets approved to go to the city commission. And then not the applicant, the owner of the property says, hey, hold on a second. They show up and say, we can show you that we didn't know about this. We can prove that came back to you, signed, sealed, and delivered, but that we didn't know about this. We were out of the country, blah, 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 whatever crazy answer they got. What happens then?
Well, not knowing is not necessarily a defense. That doesn't make it void. It's failure to give proper notice. And so under our code, it's required as first-class mail notice, certified mail. Landmark site. Okay, so she did do certified mail. So that is required, and we did comply with that. Additionally, we gave newspaper notice. It says it shall be given 12 days prior to the date set for the hearing. We did the newspaper notice. And at the first hearing that we had, when this was brought up, where we brought all the property owners before you, we gave them notice then as well, and they did not show up. So
Okay.
we have complied with the notice requirements under the law. So in accordance with that, it would not be void. The commission could go forward. if
So
it
legally,
chooses
it would go forward.
That's correct, if the commission wants to.
We also did a notice, a third notice, 10 days, within 10 days of the Historic Preservation Board making the motion to initiate designation. So a letter was sent at that time as well. So they had the letter that said, come to our meeting, we would like to discuss this. We had another letter that went out after that meeting when the board said, we want to move forward with a designation. And then they received the third letter on March 31st.
And just one more thing in our code in 47277, 2C, it says failure to receive mail notice shall not invalidate the hearing, as notice shall also be given by publication in newspaper of general circulation within the city of Fort Lauderdale. which
Yeah,
we've
but
done.
and I appreciate that aspect of the code, but realistically, I think newspaper notice is a failure of proper service personally these days. So although it's compliant, and I want to be clear here, if we had not had that return receipt, I personally would be taking a different position, even though we had done newspaper notice, because I think that direct notice to the owner is much more important here. So I would certainly echo the feeling that I would feel better if they're here, but people need to take responsibility for their own businesses. No
Sure.
pun intended of the business aspect.
Mr. Chair, is my
Mr.
mic on?
Marcus?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. As much as I can appreciate Mr. Chavon's arguments about wanting to make sure that everything is looked at, I think according to the code, it sounds like, in fact, not I think, it sounds like according to the code, we are doing everything that we are empowered to do. I don't feel comfortable going forward and saying, let's give them another month, let's give them another 2 months. Because then you're setting a precedent for every applicant that comes before this board in the future. And they're going to say, well, you gave him 2 months, why can't I get 2 months? So I mean, at this point, as long as we've adhered to the letter of the code, I feel comfortable moving ahead with the designation. I think this is a once in a moment opportunity for the city to recognize at least one of its buildings that are real treasures.
Well, Mr. Marcus, let me just cut you off for there for a minute, because I'm curious to hear from the other board members, just strictly on the notice issue first, and then before we get into whether or not there's going to be a motion or discussion on anything of that nature. So we haven't heard from Ms. Lyons, we haven't heard from Mr. Parker. I don't know if you all have any input here or any thoughts on this specific issue regarding the notice to the owner and their failure to appear this evening. I don't know if Ms. Lyons or Mr. Parker, you want to go first? Go ahead.
Everything's been pretty well stated.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Parker.
That's how I feel too.
I would have one follow-up to the notice.
Please.
Not that it's, I think, relevant to the record, but are we able to disclose, not that I'm in any way discounting that the city did its job here, clearly, and then some, but which address did it go to? Is
I
that
think that's a
fair-
great question that, yeah.
So that would be good to put on the record. I think if the city attorney would have no objection to that, to make that clear.
I don't have it. That would be a staff question, so.
Okay.
Tricia?
It was addressed to June 36 Properties LLC at 17701 Biscayne Boulevard, Suite 300, Aventura, Florida 33160.
That's the address listed on Sunbiz as well as in the property appraisers. So that's
that-
the address that we have for the owner of the property.
Is that just one more question, Richard?
Sure, of course.
Is that the owner's address or the registered agent's address?
That is the owner's address listed as the mailing address in the property appraiser's website as well as on Sunbiz, which is the
Department of
website
State.
for the
So,
businesses.
so my question would be, was the registered agent's address, if different, was that sent as well? Was a copy sent to the registered agent?
The registered agent, which it's not required under our code, but the registered agent on Sunbiz is IFO Registered Agents,
Even worse.
18305 Biscayne Boulevard, Suite 401, Aventura, Florida 33160. That's on Sunbiz, but that's not required by our code.
And that's even worse because what that is essentially a company that just acts as the registered agent for multiple businesses. So I think that the actual company is less likely or would be less likely to receive actual notice if it went there as opposed to the mailing address listed by the owner and chosen by the owner to be listed to receive mail.
I do have one question, and that is, if we vote on this and they come in and protest, what's our legal position?
Well, our legal position is we've met the notice requirements, so if we fail to give notice, it would be void, the whole proceeding would be void. But we have met the notice requirements under the law, so there is no defense to that. You could choose not to show up. You don't have to. We don't mandate that people appear at any of our hearings.
And I guess that their remedy there, to Ms. Lyons' point, would be really to go to the commission hearing where it was being considered for final approval and say, look, we weren't there, we didn't have a chance to be heard, so let's be heard now, and then try to convince the commission not to approve it?
They can, it's just from a legal basis, I don't see
So-
any argument in, on their side as far as failure to give notice, because that actual requirement of failure to give notice makes the proceeding void, which they don't have a defense for. We've given the notice.
The issue I'm having is I'm absorbing, hearing everything, is not in any way discounting that it's been done exactly the way it should. It's having an owner come into a commission meeting or maybe even later with clean hands saying, look, I genuinely did not get notice, even though by definition I have. The city did its job. They took their charge and they executed it. That's where I take issue, because I'm looking from the record of what was provided in the attachments, all the ancillary documentation with this application, which obviously was brought forth by the city. One of the things Mr. Chabon brought up, this property almost to the day was sold last year on the 6th of May. So I find it almost illogical that someone who purchased a property a year ago at the tune of $7 million plus would not appear before such a significant meeting. I don't find the logic in that. I don't think it would be done out of protest or ignorance or otherwise. I think they don't know. And that's my thought. I completely reserve that to myself. But that's where I fall short of feeling good about it and feeling right. And I'm not discounting that everything's been done correctly or the merits of the application itself.
Right.
It's where we're at this very difficult juncture. And I don't think it's setting a precedent that would be difficult to explain in this particular case. It's very hard to see that. And this property, I don't believe, unless otherwise, was really had traded time and time again. It's not relevant to right now. But what's relevant is I don't feel that it's been done in a way where I'm under the impression ethically that this person knows or this company knows that we're sitting here tonight.
Yeah, but that's speculation is what is
It's fair.
but that speculation is why we have procedures in place.
Sure.
And that speculation is not the standard. The standard isn't whether, because essentially what I'm hearing you say, Mr. Rosa, is you would only feel comfortable if someone were here. And And that is not our job. And the fact that we are speculating that because the property was sold almost 1 year ago to the day, that it's illogical that they wouldn't show up. What if it was 2 years? What if it was 3 years?
But it wasn't. It was a year.
But it doesn't matter. The problem is the basis for your position is speculative, right? You're saying,
course it
I
is.
don't feel comfortable because I, meaning you, would show up, right? And I can't say I disagree with you if I were in that position
Any
too.
reasonable person would.
But right,
Yeah.
but nonetheless, we did our job of noticing them per the statute. They have chosen not to appear. We have no evidence to the contrary. That is, figuring out why they're not here is not our problem or our job.
Fair enough.
We, I think, more appropriately, should be putting on the record that we wish they were here. We would expect a property owner who received a notice of this sort to be present, to be heard. We would prefer if they were. We hope that any property owner in the future would be present because we as a board can only best do our job if they are here so we can hear their position.
I guess
Nonetheless, I do not think that should bar us from moving forward. And I keep going back in my own mind to what harm would it be? What harm is there to push it off for a month, right? But I think that opens a slippery slope when there is no issue with the procedure that we have put forth under the law to then do this in the future. And I cannot allow that. To my mind, and we've done this in the past where when this issue was first brought up with these properties and there was a question of whether or not the owners were noticed him, right? And we said, let's push it off. Let's make sure they all get letters. Let's get them all here. They all came through a big meeting that I wasn't at because evidently, history was on my side. Arthur presided over the meeting, did a great job. We dealt with the property owners, had a good conversation. That was done because the statute was not followed, because notice was not given properly. Here, it was.
But is that true?
Yes.
We didn't send a letter before?
Not before that hearing. The first time it came up.
The first hearing that it came up for discussion, notice is not required to be sent by regular mail to the property owners. So that was requested by the board and we did it voluntarily, but that was not required. But we had 2 hearings before it even came here today for this actual.
On this item?
application.
Yes.
Yes, and so they showed up to neither. So the first one, no regular mail notice was sent, and then the second one, regular mail notice was sent.
So,
Okay.
yeah, so I'm going to exercise the discretion of the chair to say that notice was properly served. We have satisfied the due process requirements under the law. This board will move forward with this item at this time. I am not going to entertain any motions to continue this matter, but I'm certainly willing to entertain any comments on the item itself and or motions if there are any to be made.
Just one last comment.
Please.
In your statement to say that you would have been uncomfortable if we didn't have a signed receipt, you wouldn't rely on the newspaper because you don't have a lot of confidence in that.
That's correct.
So I parlay saying I have the same feeling about the mail. End of story.
Appreciated.
Yeah, but there's a huge difference between the two.
Maybe not in this case.
Well, a certified return receipt is very different from a new.
There's no question it's different, but
I don't think
I just feel
it's
so
apples and
uncomfortable not
It's
seeing
apples
somebody.
and oranges, yeah.
Yeah, and I agree with Ms. Lyons to that extent. When you have a certified receipt, an individual
Yeah.
had that letter in their hand, signed their name to it. If it was, not the person best suited to get that letter, that's on the business. That's not on us.
Great.
I'm gonna interject a unique point here, a comment real quick before we get into the meat of this matter, because I received a call shortly after our last meeting from a citizen, random citizen in the city of Fort Lauderdale, who called my office to say that, and I don't remember their name, but so if you're watching, I apologize, but to say that they were so impressed with the way that our board operated, that they were so impressed with the discussions that we had and how none of us wanted to rip each other's face off, even if we didn't agree. And that we just, they said it was really good and everybody had everybody was talking and it was, didn't always agree. And I said, well, yeah, isn't that how it's supposed to work? And they were so impressed. So I forgot to mention that at the top of the agenda. I wanted to just let everybody know that there are people watching who appreciate the way that we do things. And I think that tonight's conversation is a great example of that. where even when we don't necessarily agree, we certainly do so in a reasonable and professional fashion. And I have a lot of respect for everybody on this board and all the work that we do. So thank you to all of the board members for keeping in line with that. All right, enough of that. Now that we all feel good about one another. Any comments as to the substance of the item currently before us? Arthur, I'm sure you want to go.
Well, my one thought on right now is that I'm glad you discussed the idea of feelings and assumptions driving a decision rather than what we're guided by in terms of the city code. So I would hope that everyone would look at the city code with a grain of salt, but understand that, I mean, that's what we're tasked to do here. That's all for now.
All right. Anybody have any other comments on the substantive issue? Otherwise, I would entertain a motion if there were one.
Just a question of if this was to not pass, it can come back up again. Is that correct?
Yes, it can come back, I believe, is it 6 months? What do we put in there? 12 months, 12 months, 12 months later.
So I'd like to make a motion to.
Sure.
May I just suggest something before you make the motion? I'm
Yes.
sorry.
No,
There's a
of
code section that's relevant. It's 472411C4I, and it says, if the Historic Preservation Board recommends a designation, it shall explain how the proposed landmark or historic district qualifies for designation under the criteria contained in this section. This evaluation may include references to other buildings and areas in the city and shall identify the significant features of the proposed landmark, historic buildings, or historic district. So that's a little code section that I thought is important to just for purposes of your motion, so.
In 2 words, right? Yeah. Well, I believe that as Tricia introduced us to the architect and the owner, which is always a unique relationship when it works. And this sounds like it was one of those unique relationships that really worked. And there was a symbiotic relationship between the two of them. Charles McKirahan was undoubtedly the architect of his day in Fort Lauderdale. He was emblematic of everything that was happening after the war. And I still don't believe he's earned his due in the pantheon of great architects. When I was in architectural school, one of the first things we learned was most architects are going to go out there and copy details from this building and copy details from this building, mash it together, and you have a whole new design, which you may or may not. But then there's the very few architects, of which I would put McKirahan in this place, along with people like Frank Lloyd Wright and Corbusier in France, where they were form givers. They really created new forms and new architecture. We in Fort Lauderdale, most people have no idea how innovative this was after the war. After the war, civilian society was able to capitalize upon the material advances made during the war. Specifically, there were admixtures made for concrete that could make it span fast, span further, be stronger, and all of the above. And that helped the architects and engineers' imaginations in terms of utilizing these new kinds of materials in new ways. And that, coupled with the exuberance of the war ending and everybody back in peace mode, you really had a whole combustible combination that really built modern Fort Lauderdale. So I think this is an emblematic building of not only a unique relationship between owner and architect, but an emblematic relationship, emblematic feeling, no, I shouldn't say feeling, touchstone of this architect's work in South Florida, and especially in Fort Lauderdale.
Right.
Thank you.
Motion?
So I'd like to make a motion I move to approve the request for historic landmark designation located at 2860 North Federal Highway under case number UDP HPD 21003. Based on a finding, this request meets criteria C, D, and F as outlined in section 47-24.11.C.7 of the ULDR.
Is that based on the evidence presented today by staff?
Yes, it was.
Thank you.
Great. Motion having been made, is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Ms. Lyons. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none. All right, let's go ahead and call the roll on this one, please.
I vote in favor of historic designation.
Yes.
Yay.
Yes.
Mr. Rosa?
Nay.
Mr. Chavon?
No.
And Chair Blank.
Yes, in favor.
So it passed 5-2.
Great, thank you so much. All right. And I think the record is clear. First of all, I appreciate the conversation as we always have, but I appreciate the sentiments that were echoed here tonight. And I think that it's clear, that the record is clear that this board wants, desires, and hopefully will get in the future input and cooperation and participation by the owners of any properties that we are discussing for any matter, because I think that certainly does help the conversation. Yes?
May I just clarify something? I think, Jamie, you said pass 5-2. I thought it was 3-4.
4-3. That's what I heard.
I just want to make sure you have the right.
No, 5.
Two.
5-2.
Oh, okay, sorry. I thought Mr. Carney voted. Okay,
No, he voted
sorry.
in favor. He
Just
said
making
yay.
sure. Thanks.
Yep. All right. Yay. Okay, so that will bring us to, that's the only substantive item that we have on our agenda this evening. Communication to the City Commission. I don't believe we have any this week. That'll bring us to the for the good of the city items. The first item is the Strategic Historic Preservation Plan update. Trish?
Supposed to leave it on, but it's not on.
There we go.
I did email everyone last week about the Strategic Historic Preservation Plan and kind of where we are and our next steps. We've changed a little bit as far as the direction we're going in, so I'm just going to give you a brief overview on
Trish, hang
behalf of our consultant.
Just hang on 2 seconds, because I don't know if these are on.
There's a little button.
There we go. Bottom right of every screen, there's a button. You got yours? You guys got your screens on here?
What do you mean, the bottom?
Bottom behind it.
Oh, behind it. There is? Where's my button? Oh,
Gotcha.
you got it. Thank you.
Everybody good?
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so I just wanted to give you a brief overview of where we're at in our process on behalf of our consultant, the Craig Group, who's conducting our preparation of the Strategic Historic Preservation Plan. We've had a few outreach activities so far. So we've conducted an online survey. We had over 200 responses, which is very significant for a survey. And we did an online educational presentation towards the end of March, and then we held 2 in-person workshops on the same subject matter. So we've collected a lot of feedback, a lot of information from the community as far as where they'd like to see historic preservation go. Our strategic plan is based on our comprehensive plan and our goals that are outlined there. So on your screen right now are the 3 goals that we have for our historic preservation element. And so they really align with the direction we're headed with the strategic plan. And one of the first things that is in our comprehensive plan is to prepare this strategic plan for the city. Other than that, the other goal is to provide educational and incentive opportunities to further the city's historic preservation goals and ensure historic preservation goals are met through the coordination and implementation of various local, state, and national preservation tools. So for the preservation plan so far, there's been 4 other goals that have been developed that really complement our existing comprehensive plan. And I won't go into super detail about this because following up from today's meeting, I'll send an email to all of you and request that you start to help us prioritize these objectives. And it'll just be a form that you can number it in order of 1 through 5 and tell us what you believe is the most significant, what we should be working on over the next 3 to 5 years so that we can start to further refine this document. So the first goal is to continue our architectural resource survey effort, and that's something that's ongoing. So there's 5 different objectives that are outlined, and what we're looking to do is just get a sense of what should be the priority out of this. The second is to collaborate with city and county agencies and nonprofit organizations to promote historic places as contributing to Fort Lauderdale's community character, economic vitality, and quality of life. And then there's 3 objectives under that as well. So we want to look to prioritize those. We would also, under each of these objectives, have action items, and those are in the process of being developed. So for each of these objectives, we would get further into detail. And then the third goal is to ensure that the city policies related to historic properties and cultural resources are consistent with the city's certified local government obligation to recognize and protect historic places. Right now we have 1 objective there, which are to review the city's regulations and incentives. And then under that, as we move forward, we'll start to identify different action items that can complement that objective. And then the fourth goal is primarily related to resiliency and making sure that historic properties within the community have the resources that they need to assist with any climate change related type events. And so there's 4 objectives under there as well. So that's really the broad overview. Like I said, I'll be emailing you out a form that I'd appreciate if you just send back to me in the near term. Are there any questions about the direction we're headed? Nope. Okay.
I like it. Thank you, Trish. Anything else on that item? Anything else that we need to discuss regarding that topic, Trish? Nope. All right, great. All right, so that'll take us to Historic Preservation Month recognition of rehabilitation projects.
So this this was brought up
Yep.
back over here.
Hi.
Keeping it lively tonight. This was brought up last month by Mr. Bray, who is unfortunately not with us tonight, at this meeting about identifying different properties to recognize for Historic Preservation Month. He did provide me a list of properties, but I discussed it with our city attorney's office, and we didn't want to put them on the agenda specifically for discussion. We wanted to understand more of a direction that the board would like to go with this.
So I think that Mr. Bray really should be here to kind of drive that conversation because it was his idea.
Right.
So
My concern really with it, just to share with the board, is that I didn't want them putting an address on an agenda per se, because we haven't spoken to these property owners. We really don't know if they want that kind of attention associated with their property. So I wouldn't want my address on an agenda. So I just figured that we should just talk about it first before we choose to go forward.
understood, and I appreciate that.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah, please.
Sorry, I also have an additional item under good of the
Hey,
city, which I neglected to tell you.
Hang on 2 seconds. I want to finish this item, and then we'll be happy to address that. I would entertain a motion just to move this item to next month's agenda so that hopefully Mr. Bray will be here and we could address it with him here if anybody wanted to make that motion.
Yeah,
All right, moved by Mr. Carney,
second.
seconded by Mr. Marcus. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, so that item will just be bumped till next month's agenda so that Mr. Bray can be here and we can address it with him. Mr. Marcus, go ahead. You had an addition to the agenda?
Yeah, my addition to the agenda is, it's come to my attention, I don't have a picture to show you guys, but at 1710 South Andrews Avenue, there is what's been identified as a potential historic landmark. It's the plain building with the very wavy marquee that goes around the building. Sort of like, it looks like a a hoop skirt on a building. And it's been there, I don't quite have the date of
What was the address? Arthur?
1710. Yeah, the Wells Fargo building. It's not Wells Fargo. Pardon?
The hospital bought that.
Well, I didn't know that, but I've been led to believe that somebody is renovating it and they may be tearing down the building. So my question would be, since this is called by the city as a potential historic landmark, why can't someone in the city, and I would hesitate to say us, be able to talk to the owner and ask them why they can't save the facade and build what they're building at the same time?
Probably because they're going to build a giant hospital tower.
I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know.
But-
I don't mean that. I don't
I-
mean to,
I
that sounded very
understand.
flippant. I didn't mean for that. I'm
You're
just
probably right.
guessing. I think that might be a conversation for you to have with Trish offline first, and then
Yeah.
go from there. And if it's something that needs to be agenda'd in the future, we can do that.
Well, refresh my memory, Trish. How does one get a topic on the agenda? Because I've understood that talking about it now is one way, but then it has to be voted on.
Yeah, I mean, if we could do that, you can ask Tricia to add the item to the agenda, and then it can be placed on the agenda for the next month. We can certainly bring it up at the meeting, but could be notice issues
Yeah,
for the
no,
public.
you need to know this.
And for this specific topic, I mean, we'd have to figure out what exactly the issue would be. I mean, I know that you're bringing up a potential. Go ahead, Sherry.
Yeah.
I see you. I see you.
So I guess my question is, who identified it as a potential historic landmark? Is it the city that did that, or who?
The city did that, yeah.
Okay, so how did we do that? Is it just
It's
a
a
Oh,
survey?
There's a memo.
One of the architectural resource surveys.
Okay.
An outside consultant was hired to conduct, identified the property as a potential historic landmark, and they filled out a Florida Master Site File form, and there's documentation associated with the structure.
So, Arthur, what's the ask?
Well, the ask is,
But just a FYI,
So, yeah, please.
apparently the city commission did discuss this structure last night
Oh.
at their city commission meeting and asked for additional information that we can share with you.
Then let me suggest this, Arthur.
okay,
Let's put this on our agenda for next month for an update on and we can just roll it from agenda to agenda until we hear back from the city commission on what they've done with it. If
the
any.
one question with that, Tricia, will the owner receive a notice of the discussion?
Well, I think that right now it looks like the commission's just trying to get more information before they figure out what, if anything, to do with it. So I don't know if there's anything to notice the owner for.
Well, I'm
Be
just
for our
thinking-
for
I'm
our
thinking
discussion?
Our questions may be different than the commission's questions.
Well, I
I
think that
don't know what they're looking at.
I don't think it's being agenda'd for any action item, more so than just informationally at this point.
Well, informationally, just what is happening with the site,
Sure.
with the property,
I mean, we
and what
could,
is happening with this potentially historic building.
let me suggest this.
Go ahead.
Let's place it on the agenda under the for the good of the city. That way we can get an update on what information the commission's gotten.
Okay.
Let's send a letter, regular mail to the owner, regular mail, just saying, hey, it's on our agenda just for conversation, no vote, nothing, of the issue. We'd love to have you here for the conversation so that we can say, look, this is a building of interest. What's your plans with it? Do you mind sharing? And
Yeah.
if they want to, great. And if not, that's okay. I know Sherry doesn't like that because it would be addressing a potential issue that could come before the board, but it's for the good of the city. It's public. Let's invite them. It's good to get them in early. And we could say, look, this is something the city commission's discussing. We're just curious as to what's going on.
Can we do that?
I think that the issue is that the interim protective measures really come into play when there's an application submitted. And so there's been no application submitted to designate this particular property. So essentially what you're doing is asking people to voluntarily stop doing what they're planning on doing maybe.
Well, but what if
because-
there's been an application to demolish the building and they never get to the point of asking to designate the building.
But that's why, if you'd like to possibly designate the building, then maybe we should go along the lines of that discussion and then maybe put it on the agenda for that. I don't know what the commission said, so what exactly?
With all due respect to the city attorney, I think that's jumping the gun. I think we have to first determine what the owner's aims are with the property.
But I think the problem is we have no jurisdiction to ask them to do that. And so I don't know about asking for city resources to be
So-
spent to reaching out to this owner to ask them
How,
to voluntarily.
how
come in.
about if we were to send a letter to the city commission asking them to ask the questions that we want to ask?
Well, you could send a communication to the city commission. It's just that, like, there's nothing in our code that mandates that they come in here and tell us anything other
No,
than.
that's why it would be just an invitation. It wouldn't be a
Right.
mandate. So then let me suggest this. Because I don't want to understand, the city commission could certainly say, hey, Historic Preservation Board, we'd love for you to discuss this to determine whether or not this property would be one that would be ripe for designation, right? Yes?
Yes, and the
Okay,
Historic
so-
Preservation Board can do it on its own, too.
Sure, understood. No, but that wasn't my question. That wasn't my question. So then my recommendation is this. I like making recommendations and then seeing what people think, right? Why don't we send a communication to the city commission and say, hey, we're aware that this is a property that might be potential for historic designation. We're aware that you have discussed this property and are looking for more information. We are willing to have a conversation about this property, and we encourage you to ask us to have that conversation and to invite the owner to join us. Does that sound like a good communication?
I think that sounds very good.
Mr. Parker, you like that? Ms. Rosa?
I'm fine with it.
Okay.
Yep.
It's an invitation. Ms. Lyons, that sound good? Great. Mr. Carney? Mr. Chavone?
I like it. Just a quick comment. I just think it's I think it's wonderful that this board is entertaining a transition of and more communication and open-minded. I just feel like this is so good because, for an analogy, it was like prior to these talks, it was like we got somebody on the operating table and cut them open and decided what was wrong with them, rather than say, let's give it a look and see if they even need to be here. We're talking about things. We're inviting people before we get to the point where we've got guns and knives drawn.
Wait till we designate the parrot. No.
Yeah, we need to do it over beer and pizza. But anyway, I just want to thank
Locating our
everybody.
next
I
meeting.
really think, I think the comment from the person who called you was very valid. I think we're very fortunate to have the staff, everybody working together. There's room for improvement. We're a work in progress. We're getting our balance. We're making some really good improvements, and patience is a virtue. Thank you.
Of course. All right. So then that'll be the communication to the city commission by acclamation since nobody objected.
You want to make sure Jamie got it, because sometimes there's confusion of what.
We,
Yeah.
I got you. I got you. The communication is as follows. The Historic Preservation Board is aware of the potential ability for the property located at
1710 South Andrews Avenue.
to be designated a historic property or building or location. We are also
Potential historic landmark.
potential historic landmark. Thank you, Mr. Marcus. We are also aware that the city commission has begun conversations surrounding this property. Accordingly, we are notifying and encouraging the city commission to request this board discuss possible designation of that landmark if it qualifies, or to institute discussions surrounding the designation of that landmark. And furthermore, we would encourage the commission to send notice to the owner to join this board for those discussions.
Can I please have a vote? Thank
Ye-
you.
Sure. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Can somebody just adopt the motion for that So, because the chair can't do the motion, sorry.
True.
please.
No, all right, fine. No, you're right. Mr. Marcus, you adopting that language?
Yes.
All right, moved by Mr. Marcus. Is there a second by Mr. Rosa?
Second.
Thank you so much. Seconded by Mr. Rosa.
Can I ask for a clarification?
Oh, yeah. Y'all making it hard. Go ahead.
There was mention that we do know that the city commission has been in contact with the owner.
No.
That was
No,
something you
the
said.
conversation is that they were having conversations surrounding this property. We ask that they send notification to the owner to join us in discussions should the city commission refer them to this board.
Okay.
The motion having been made, a second having been held as well. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That will be the communication to the city. Thank you. Any other business for this board on this evening?
I want to just make one comment. And
Yes.
The theme of the meeting has seemed to be in some ways notice, some sort of a mailbox rule type of meeting. With that in mind, I don't know if we keep a running list of potential amendments or revisions, modifications to the ULDR or the applicable code, but I just wanted to throw out there, put on the record that if in the event we can make that at a future date when the amendment opens, when the possibility opens, the idea that when the city as an applicant has been brought forth for an agenda item, that there be one additional way of serving notice, that notice being a simple search for a personal residence of an affiliated owner, if owned by an entity, and then serving that residence as well. I don't think it's a huge reach. It's a very limited amount of work that needs to go into that. The letter's going out anyway. And I think for me, it helps me understand every effort being made. Well, I think we all agree as a consensus, maybe it's just me, that mail and newspaper is in some ways antiquated. So with that in mind, it would help me sort of feel like everything has been done.
Let me just ask one point of clarification there.
Sure.
Would you want that mail notice to the individual owner or individual director or board member of the entity that is the owner to go certified as well?
Sure. Yes.
I know it's not in the code, but I think that
No, no, it's on the code.
Listen, I think, but I think it's an interesting aspect to say that, here's the problem though, Richard, is I don't think we can treat the city being an applicant differently from anybody else. So I think that it would just be a straight up code that when an entity owns a property, that at least one of their directors be personally served by U.S. certified mail.
That would be a fine addition to it.
Sorry to interrupt. The problem with doing that, just so you're aware, but you probably already know this, a lot of times with LLCs, when we're doing like any transaction with them,
LLC.
it's another. One
course.
day I was upstairs and I literally looked and there were 50 and I just couldn't take it anymore.
I got a
never
better
got
idea.
to a person.
Sherry, I'm sorry to cut you off, but Richard,
yeah.
I have a better idea for the suggestion, maybe moving forward. How about that in addition to the entity being served at its mailing address, that its registered agent also be served?
I would be fine with that. And I don't want to carve out special exceptions. That's not my goal here.
Right.
But where I think, and I don't want to create for example, I don't want to say over a certain threshold of value, therefore this triggers. I'm just thinking if we're using mail, because mail is codified as a sufficient way of notice, I don't think it's unreasonable to add to that where you're not going down the rabbit hole of an entity web. The personal residence that may be reflected through an easy search of a property appraiser. If it's a Broward County resident, if it's a Miami-Dade resident, I'm not saying search far and wide, and I don't have the answer on how to make that perfectly set in a concise way, but it's just a suggestion, just something to mark on the record. If and when it comes up in more of an amendment workshop, I'll try to distill it in a better fashion at that point.
Yeah, no, and I think that suggestion is well taken, and I think that everybody on the board would agree that an additional step wouldn't be a bad thing. I mean, it's definitely not required at this point, but I don't think it would be a bad thing. I would just suggest that to avoid the LLC web, right, that we all are well aware of, that maybe the registered agent would be a better path to go down. I don't know, but whenever that conversation is had, I'd certainly welcome being part of that as well.
I would have concerns about saying it's the residents. If we don't have any basis for that, especially if it's a name that there's multiple of that name in the record or in the phone book. We aren't sure which one is which. So that would be difficult if we don't have anything to point to, like Sunbiz. With Sunbiz, if there is a registered agent that is part of that record, and we can point to it and verify this is the correct person listed. Something else that occurs when a designation does go to the city commission is that we do notice it again in the newspaper, and we also provide a sign notice at the physical property. So there's
Okay.
other notices that do occur following this meeting.
All right. So, I mean, maybe they'll show up to work and see a
Yeah.
sign notice and say, what the hell's this?
No, the distinction on the same name type of item is
Yeah.
usually a middle initial. But look, all points well made, all understood. Just to put it on as was the theme, it seems in some ways of tonight's meeting.
Yeah,
That's
no,
all.
and again, I think your point is well taken, certainly.
And just for the record, any request for a code change would need to go through the proper channels to make that request, such as a communication to the city commission.
Yeah, and I think that that's something that we may want to discuss a little bit further in the future, as we go forward, and then maybe actually send a communication. So let's not formally put that on the agenda, but let's just keep that in mind for future discussion. I think it's something that we can all agree would be well taken and good to talk about.
Agreed.
All right. Anything else for the good of the order? I hope everybody has a spectacular weekend, Mother's Day if you're celebrating it in any way, shape, or form. And if you're not, just have a damn good time. Enjoy the weather. Meeting's adjourned.